also from Brussels, by not one but two members of the European Parliament, UK MEP Daniel Hannan and German MEP David McAllister. Welcome to you both. It's a delight to see you both side by side as well on this very divisive issue. Daniel Hannan, if I can come to you first, I'm wondering if you think that the British Prime Minister Theresa May can still achieve a deal that rings true to her mantra, if you like, that Brexit means Brexit. Can she still get something agreed?
Only if she drops the kind of sunk costs stubbornness that has brought us to where we are. There's no way that we can have any kind of lasting deal if it involves a backstop that one side regards as contingent and unlikely to be used, but the other side regards as a perfectly acceptable solution. I mean, if that was any negotiation, you'd see why immediately one side would be disincentivized from making any further concessions. And so I think the way we're going, any deal that emerges from this summit is not going to get through Parliament.
David McAllister, if I can come to you, the optimism for this summit has been particularly low from many of the dignitaries as they were arriving today. Are you still optimistic that the EU and the UK can agree to something and that we won't see, come March 29th, the UK crashing out of the European Union?
I would say 90% of the negotiations are now completed, but obviously we're not going to find an agreement tonight. So the best thing would be that we continue our negotiations to finalize a text for another summit of European Union leaders mid-November. But we have to find a deal latest in December because we are really now running out of time. I'm still optimistic, but of course we have to prepare now for the worst possible scenario, and that would be a no-deal Brexit.
But Daniel Hannan, my understanding is that you aren't afraid of a no-deal Brexit. You've talked a lot about a crisis of our democracy if we had a second referendum, for example, here in Britain, and you'd be OK with the idea of no deal and going back to World Trade Organization rules?
I'd much prefer there to be a deal. Of course I would. It's much better to have amicable relations with your immediate neighbours. We have a continuing interest in the prosperity and security of Europe. We want to have rich neighbours. We want them to be good customers, and we like them. They're old friends. So I'd much prefer there to be a deal. But the paradox of what we're seeing playing out at the current summit is that the issue that is holding up an amicable agreement is a complete non-issue. And what will happen if the talks break down, or if as I think is more likely, the ensuing treaty fails to make it through Parliament, is that in a no-deal scenario, the UK government will not impose any frontier infrastructure in Ireland. That's been our position from day one. I can't imagine any Dublin government imposing any infrastructure on its side of the line. So we would then end up with no border and no deal. And we could, of course, have had no border and a deal. That's what's so bizarre about the way this whole process has played out.
So, Daniel Hannan, I want to come back to you on this point then, because so much has been made about backstops. And from what you're saying now, you're saying that there should be no question of a backstop at all, even though both sides have agreed, at least to the principle of having some kind of a backstop. They just can't agree on which one. If you were Prime Minister, if you were going in and negotiating, even though she's not been invited to dinner, but if you were in her shoes today, what would you do? What would be your first route of negotiation?
Well, my own preference the day after the vote was that we should have taken a kind of EFTA-type solution where we'd be in the market but outside the political institutions. It sadly was rejected by Remainers and Leavers out of hand, but I think in retrospect that would have saved us a lot of hassle. But almost any outcome would be better than a backstop that leaves the UK in the customs union, leaving Brussels in charge of 100% of our trade policy with 0% input from us, and indeed which would then, as it were, have Brussels controlling the UK market, the fifth largest in the world, and using it as a bauble to dangle in trade talks with third countries. So either a simple free trade deal using technology at the Irish border, or an EFTA-type arrangement, or simply, if none of that works, if the EU isn't interested in granting a deal like that, then, frankly, a minimum sort of skeleton deal that just looks after the basic things that all countries do with their neighbours, even with unfriendly neighbours like with Russia or Iran or something, extradition, aviation, police cooperation, that kind of thing. Any of those outcomes would be better than the UK remaining in the customs union.
David McAllister, to you, Theresa May hasn't been invited to dinner. Some say the optics of this aren't particularly favourable to the UK at the moment, given the fact that the UK is still a fully signed up member of the European Union, that she should perhaps be at the dinner negotiating on her cause. Would you say that Brexit so far, the negotiations so far, have encouraged or put other countries off from potentially going down the Brexit route and potentially leaving the Union themselves?
Well, this is happening for the first time that a country is leaving our European Union, so this is something new. It's a new challenge for all governments and countries involved. The EU27 is negotiating the British withdrawal as a bloc, and what will happen tonight is that first the Prime Minister will present the latest state of play in London, her plans how we can get this done, and then the EU leaders will listen very carefully, and afterwards, when the Prime Minister has left the dinner, they will discuss the way forward. I still believe that we desperately need to find a solution. We need to get an orderly British withdrawal from the European Union done, and that's why we have to work hard. And the European Union was very clear right in the beginning. It's not about being nasty. It's not about punishing the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom wants to leave our family of nations. We have to respect this, even though we deeply regret this. But of course, they will have to leave our family of nations according to our joint rules. And we have now concluded 90% of the whole negotiation agreement. But of course, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And in the end, and this is where I agree with Dan Hannan, it's the Irish and Northern Irish border issue which still has to be resolved.
And your colleague standing next to you, David, would no doubt be dismayed at the idea of this. But if there was to be a second referendum, if Britain voted to remain in the EU, would the UK be welcome? Just briefly.
I strongly believe that a European Union with 28 member states, including the United Kingdom, would still be a better place than an EU of 27 member states without the United Kingdom.
And that prospect is why there has been no progress in the talks, because there are still people in Britain and among the 27 who think that if they play hardball, we might somehow drop the whole idea.
No, we accept the British decision to leave, but still we're very sad that the British are leaving us.
Well, it's nice to see the two of you stood side by side for now, at least. Anyway, Daniel Hannan, David McAllister, my thanks to you both.